Okay, so then if there's no questions, let me move on here to sleep restriction therapy, which is oddly named because we really don't, I mean, it's not, you're not restricting sleep, so it's kind of silly. But anyway, most people will call it like time in bed restriction or sleep efficiency training, something like that. So essentially what you're doing is you're matching their time in bed to their current sleep drive. So you're going to harness that homeostatic drive. Okay, now with all of these treatments, like so for example, for stimulus control, when I'm introducing it, I would have introduced it after explaining conditioned arousal. And when I say explaining conditioned arousal, what that actually means to me is that I would have asked them if this sounds like their experience. So I would have said, you know, tell me about what happens to you in your evening. And I would have tried to get that switch story somehow. That makes sense. So I would know that it does apply to them and they would be looking for a solution. And I've already asked what their theory is and what solution they would propose. And so we've already kind of gone to that place. The same thing goes with this. So I'm going to start with the idea about whether or not they overvalue quantity versus quality. So if they said, so what I'm going to ask them is this: if you could choose only one, would you prefer 8 hours of poor quality sleep or 6 hours of deep quality sleep? In which case, they almost always make a joke about it. Are those my only two options? In which case, we can laugh about it, and I'll say, sorry, you know, I want to see where you're at here. If they say 8 hours, they're not in a state of readiness for this treatment. And so it's much better for us to move into cognitive therapy with them and to find out where their beliefs are with respect to sleep length. In Western culture, there is it is pushed in public health to the exclusion of people with insomnia, this idea that everyone needs a certain amount of sleep. Now, in some ways that's true. So people, generally speaking, need between 6 and 9 hours. They actually push 7 to 9 hours publicly. And if we don't push for that, then we have lots of people who don't think sleep is important, and they develop all these chronic illnesses that we pay for, and they kill people in their cars because they're sleep deprived. So it makes good sense to really push that as a public health message, but it creates insomnia for many people. Everyone listening, if I were to prescribe 8 hours, I would create insomnia in many of you. And in some of you, I would sleep deprive you because you're greater than an 8-hour sleeper. So your sleep length is has some genetic loading, and definitely it's related to behavior. So it's related to how active you are, that your body determines what your sleep need is going to be. So really we should be thinking about continuous sleep, ease of sleep, like falling asleep and staying asleep, and the quality of sleep in terms of the deep sleep. If somebody says that they got 6 hours of deep quality sleep and that is enough for them, then they already value what is healthy sleep, and they're good to go. So we're going to explain that if you want to increase or improve rather your sleep quality and continuity, then you have to increase your sleep drive. I would have already explained the balloon to this person. And I'm going to talk about how having that strong full balloon is really going to reduce wakefulness, let you fall asleep into the normal amount of time. You're going to feel a lot better too. So what we're going to do initially is we're going to shrink your time in bed to match whatever your body has determined your current need is. And then once your body starts filling up all that time, that means that you won't have insomnia anymore. Then we're gonna listen to the body to see if it needs more. And if your body needs more time in bed, then we're gonna extend the time in bed. So shrink down to what your body can produce right now, and then extend because your body has learned to produce more sleep. So let me kind of break that down more slowly. You're going to need to know how much time they are sleeping right now. And so because we need to match their time in bed with their prescribed time in bed. So when they get into bed and out of bed, we're going to have to match that with what they can produce. So if you're only able to produce 6 hours right now, spending 9 hours in bed is not cutting it. It's a lot like going to a shoe store and saying, I'm a size 6, but go ahead and give me a size 10 because I want bigger feet. If you were to do that, what would occur is that your foot rather would look bigger with the larger shoe. It would have the appearance, but it wouldn't be functional, right? So you wouldn't be able to walk around, and so there's really no purpose of that. So if you are currently a 6-hour sleeper, then spending 10 hours in bed just because you want more doesn't make sense for this specific mechanism, because it actually sends a message to that system. Oh, you need less sleep. Okay. And so it produces less and less deep sleep. Less deep sleep means you're going to get less sleep. So what we're going to do is we're going to figure out what their average total sleep time is right now. We're not going to ask them what their average total sleep time is because we're not going to get the right answer, but we're going to derive it from the sleep diaries, and then we will know the right answer. And then we're going to prescribe that. Now, we actually prescribe that with 30 minutes built in because we want to show sort of a normal amount of time to fall asleep, and because people with insomnia tend to have an error of about 20 minutes or so they tend to underestimate. I also have a minimum number of hours that I sleep restrict somebody. This isn't a hard, fast rule, but it's a general rule. I don't usually go below 6 hours. 6 hours is the lowest end of normal. And I typically find that when people are lower than that, they have a misperception problem. They're missing sleep. So I don't want to penalize them on the basis of that. There are circumstances I might go all the way to what their total sleep time is, but generally when somebody comes in and they say that they've been sleeping for 2 hours, that's not possible on a regular basis. So I'm generally speaking going to match their average total sleep time pretty closely, but when the average is below 6 hours, then I might keep it at 6 hours. And again, once they're under this restricted time in bed, they'll start filling up that time. And usually you'll find that they'll have a ubiquitous problem, which is that they actually will then become sleepy. And when they become sleepy, that is the body's way of saying you need more time in bed. And that whole system has shifted sleep needs. So it says, oh, you need more deep sleep, more. And so it's filling up that time with deep sleep. And that means that if you spend a little bit more time in bed, would get more sleep. And so we're going to listen to the body and extend the prescription when that happens. And I'll tell you about how in a minute. So the first thing is I'm actually going to show you what we do in person with sleep diaries. So we're usually sitting shoulder to shoulder. And I'll say, all right, great. So first thing I want to know is how much you're sleeping. And so first, let's figure out how much time you're in bed, because that's easier to go backwards. So you're in bed from 11 to 7:15. Okay, so that's like about 8 hours, 15 minutes. Sorry about the decimals. I actually think in decimals. Bit of a nerd. And now let's take away all the wakefulness from that time of your bed, because you weren't asleep that whole time. It took you about 25 minutes to fall asleep from your guesstimation. Felt like you were awake about 20 minutes in the middle of the night. That's 45 minutes. And you woke up at 7, but you didn't actually get up out of bed until 7:15. So it's 15 minutes there. That's an hour of wakefulness. So let's take that away from their time in bed. And we see it was 7 hours and 15 minutes, 7.25. And I'm going to do that for each morning. actually, they're going to be doing it, and one of us is going to have a calculator, and we're going to be keeping track of the total sleep time. So we can add up all of the total sleep times and divide by the number of days. Here it would be 7 days. Okay? Now, the thing is that apps, I mean, you don't have to do that. They literally just show you what the average total sleep time is during that period, and it's right on the screen. You already know it. And so if the average total sleep time is 6.5 hours, then the prescription is going to be 6.5 hours plus 30 minutes for normal sleep. So it's 7 hours. So easy peasy. If you're doing it remotely during COVID, then that's going to be really easy for you. If you're doing it in a group, it's very easy. So I don't discourage you from using apps. I just usually use paper. So it's one thing to know how much time you should spend in bed, but it's another thing to know where that window should go. And the window needs to be kept set and steady because we are a clock. And if it's like, well, I'll just follow my body, I'll follow a feeling, not a plan. And so if I feel like going to bed at 12 and I feel like sleeping in at 8, I'll just keep moving the window around. And if you suffer from jet lag in that way, social jet lag, then you, as far as when your natural time to sleep and wake up is, you cannot use the clock to help you with those cues. And you're going to feel jet lag during the day. So we want to set a window. And the way that we set a window is the person sets the window. And I'm going to give you a really good example. So I like to use a life constraint, like a work schedule, and then work backwards. But many of my clients were on disability, right? And so that's a little bit more tricky. So you have to be flexible about this. But say they have a job and they have to be up at a certain time. So most therapists would say, what's the latest that you can get up for work and still make it there and whatever? What's a good time? Well, 7. Okay. So your prescription was 7 hours. That's the time in bed for you. So if we count back, that puts it at midnight. So I'm wondering what you think about that schedule. And the person's like, okay, yeah, that's fine. Now, what I want you to do is I want you to keep in mind that during the assessment, you have some sense about whether or not they're kind of a morning person or a night person. And so although it's them that comes up with the schedule, I think you're the keeper of whether or not this plan is realistic and a good goal. So if it were me, and you would ask that question about when's the latest you could get up to get to work in time, 7 is actually my answer. But I would hope that you would remember from my assessment that I wake up a lot earlier than that. I mean, I wake up more like 5 in the morning because I'm definitely an early bird, very early bird. And I would hope that if I said, yeah, okay, to the schedule like midnight, I would hope that you would remember from my assessment that, oh, Colleen, so it sounds like an interesting plan. But I do remember that you told me you haven't seen midnight since 1986. So I'm thinking that maybe, like, what are you going to put into place so that you could stay up that late? Or should we reconsider? Because I also noticed that you tend to wake up a lot earlier. So what time could you stay up till easily? And for me, it would be, well, I could stay up until 9:30, but it might be like a little tricky. But I could try and stay up till 9:30. Okay, well, if you stayed up till 9:30, then that would put your wake up time, your rise time at 4:30. Is that something you could do? And the answer to that question is, it would be easy for me to do that. Now, for most of you hearing this, it probably makes you shudder to think of that schedule. This is why we don't make the schedule of other people. We do not use our own preferences and our own biology or our beliefs about society, right? So somebody's schedule may be 3 a.m. until 9:30 a.m. Now, if you have a reaction to that, like, oh no, that's too late and that's sleeping in too much, then you need to kind of look at your own value system, because if that's what matches that person's physiology, then that's probably what they ought to do. So by and large, you probably will pick the rise time first and then count backwards and see if it's realistic, but it's definitely the person's choice. So if we were to look here at this practice, so this person sleeps on average for 6 hours. They spend 9 hours in bed. They usually go to bed at 10 and up at 7. So they don't really have like a strong tendency one way or another. What bedtime or rise time would you suggest? I hope that you wouldn't suggest anything, because it is up to the client. So instead, I'd say, okay, so we've got your prescription is 6.5 hours. Hopefully you understand where I got that, because there's just the 6 hours right here, and I'm going to add 30 minutes on. And I said, well, you usually wake up at 7. Do you want to keep that and work backwards, or is it more important that you still go to bed at 10? Or, I mean, what would suit you best? Because you've only got 6.5 hours to spend in bed. What do you think would suit you best? It's realistic. Now, this treatment does work very quickly. It's not very psychologically oriented, is it? Right? So it's literally just manipulating this physiologic system. That's all it's doing. It's saying to the system, oh, you need more sleep, more deep sleep, so that it responds. And it's doing that just by shortening the amount of time in bed. That's it. By doing that, very quickly, people tend to become sleepy, because they start to fill up that amount of time, because it's a limited amount of time, it's a limited window. Now they're going to worry that they won't sleep during that time, to which I will say you won't sleep at all, because I'm definitely going to go after all or none language. But you're spending 9 hours in bed and sleeping 6 hours now. If you were to spend 6.5 hours in bed, what's the worry? Well, that I would sleep like exponentially lower, like 4 hours. To which we're going to encourage an experiment. Just say, well, if that's the case and that was going to go on chronically, then we wouldn't want that, right? Because that's well below what a normal amount of sleep would be. But we've already tried giving you a larger dose of time in bed. I mean, you've tried your hardest to increase your sleep time. So I don't think that you could put any more effort into that. And so if you were just to put that on its ear and say, well, what if it doesn't operate that way? What if it operates in the way that Colleen said? Then sending it a message would mean spending a little bit of less time in bed. Would I be willing to test that for a week? And if they would, and they give it a good go, then the chances that they're going to be sleepy by the next time they see you is actually pretty high. And the reason why is that in order to get the mean, so say they got a mean of 6 hours, that means that they may have had some sleep windows that were, or some total sleep times that were like really low, like 4 hours, and a whole lot that have around 6, but they would have had to have some extension of sleep at one point or another, like 7.5 hours, that people with insomnia tend to forget about in order to come up with that mean. Well, when you set it in stone, then it means there are no possibilities of ever going above, never. And so by cutting off that little bit of extra sleep that they sometimes get in order to get that mean, you send a message to that system, and it becomes sleepy. So the next time they come in, you have to look to see if any of the following situations are met. So one of them is that they are now sleepy. If they are now sleepy, meaning that they say that they are falling asleep during the day. So the same thing we were looking at with the screen, then we're going to increase time in bed because they no longer have insomnia, right? So they at this point, if they were sleepy during the day, then they would be sleepy at night too. So they would actually produce that sleep. So we're going to increase their time in bed. If their sleep efficiency is greater than 90%, sleep efficiency, remember when I had the diary and we first figured out how much time they were in bed, and then right below we took away any time they're awake to get total sleep time. If you take those two figures, time in bed, total sleep time, and divide them, that's sleep efficiency. And it gives you a sense of the proportion of time that they are asleep when they're in bed. So that's kind of important, right? So if your sleep is ultra efficient, that means that you are asleep virtually every minute that you're in bed. We consider that pathological. We consider that okay, then let's give you a little bit more time in bed, right? So let's give you a little bit more time in bed and see if you fill it up. And that's what we would do. We'd do a sleep extension. So a sleep efficiency that's above 90% means that basically every single minute that you are in bed, you're sleeping. That's not great. We don't want that. Same thing if you're falling asleep less than 10 minutes every single night, that's too sleepy too. That's too fast. If you extended your time in bed, then you would be able to fill up more time. Your body is telling you you need that you need more time in bed. When you have insomnia, your body is saying you need less time in bed typically by producing all this light sleep. When you restrict your time in bed, oftentimes your body is going to tell you you are sleepy, and so you need more time in bed. So we're going to look at subsequent sessions. So right now this is only session 1, so this doesn't really apply. But in session 2, 3, and 4, we are going to start the session off with looking at their sleep diary and looking for whether or not sleepiness is there. So I'll return to this when we get back to